I have to mention how the trailer makes the claim that this movie is introducing Abby Ryder Fortson. You honestly thought that we would forget about this?
He's so ugly! I love him!
That was when we were introduced 8 years ago. You ain't taking the credit for that. Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret is based on the highly beloved middle-grade novel from 1970 about an 11-year-old girl going on 12 who moves across the river from New York City to New Jersey, navigating her new school as well as the beginning of her adolescence and exploring religion. Now, I have no prior connection to the book, though I never was exactly the target demographic. I did talk to my mom about it the other night, asking her if she was familiar with the book by that name, and she was like, "Am I familiar? That book was everywhere when I was in school." Though she did also say that she didn't remember it being that good. I was somewhat drawn to the movie when I saw that it was helmed by Kelly Fremon Craig, who wrote and directed The Edge of 17, which I really like. Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, which is quite a mouthful of a title. Has there ever been a movie title that's 2 complete sentences? I think it's fine. As someone who never read the book or even knew anything about it until now, I found it to be a pleasant one-time watch. While meandering in places, the lead character is consistently likable, and I felt for her as she goes through certain anxieties that would seem minor to an adult but are much more difficult for a tween. This is mainly because of the actress, Abby Ryder Fortson, as I mentioned earlier, who I think is shaping up to be a rising star. She was friggin' adorable in the Ant-Man movies, as well as A Dog's Journey. Forever My Girl, well, in her defense, no child actor could make that writing work. There are occasions in this movie when she overplays it a bit, mostly when she's quickly saying a really desperate prayer to God, but beyond that she's very good. Rachel McAdams is also terrific as Margaret's mother, and the honors go to Kathy Bates as her grandma Sylvia. I mean, Kathy Bates is fantastic in everything. She will always be the GOAT Miss Hannigan. And here, she is as charming as she's ever been, and she had all the funniest moments. Now, I didn't laugh as much for a good percentage of the rest of the movie, and that is because of what the humor revolves around in a number of other scenes. You see, as Margaret goes to this new school, she joins this small girls' club led by one of her classmates, where they talk about boys, they gossip about other girls in school, and they exercise to increase their buzz. At that age, you can imagine they also get into a few naughty things, like sneaking some Playboy magazines and biology books detailing the male anatomy, and it seems like these where a fair amount of the humor is. In my mind, The End of Innocence is a matter that I strongly feel deserves more tasteful treatment. I can handle some comedy being made out of most serious topics, but The End of Innocence is one where I don't stomach it very well. This is why Good Boys is one of those select movies that I just avoid at all costs. I do not want to see it under any circumstances. Here, it's not like it's anything gratuitous or creepy, it's just not my kind of laugh. If I laughed at all, it was an uncomfortable laugh. Nevertheless, when the movie does get serious, it's more engaging. Part of this is when Margaret begins to have anxieties regarding her adolescent phase, or seemingly lack thereof. She's the only one of the girls in the club who is still flat, if you follow me. And the 4 of them have sort of a rivalry going on amongst each other over who gets her period first. This all leads Margaret to have some insecurities about herself, which are feelings I can relate to even as a boy. When I was at that age, I too kind of felt like I was behind in my puberty compared to most other boys around me. But it proved to be worth the wait because it got me this voice that startled my friends when it finally broke. So for young people who are at that point in their lives, this movie does send a nice message to not be ashamed of how fast or slow your body changes. The aspect that I was most engaged by was seeing the subject of religion through the eyes of a 12-year-old who doesn't really come from a religious background in the long run. Now, her mother is Christian and her father is Jewish, but to keep this from being a point of contention among them, they made the mutual decision to raise their daughter without a religion. As Margaret is at the point when her life is starting to get more complicated, she wants to believe that there's someone out there watching over her, so she routinely says a prayer beginning with, "You guessed it." But even while she visits churches and synagogues, she hardly ever feels like her prayers are getting any reception, and at one point she gets to thinking that the only thing religion is good for is dividing people. Now, where this all ends for her, I felt was quite lackluster, but I'll get to that more in a bit. In terms of this movie being an adaptation of a long-beloved book, I have the sneaking suspicion that it would be just non-stop voiceover narration, possibly to the annoying extent of something like Molly's Game or Unplanned. But to its credit, the only times there's voiceover is when Margaret is saying a prayer in her head. It really is more show and less tell. I also kind of have to admire the movie for having the guts to not modernize the source material in order to appeal to Generation Z, and instead setting it at the time the book was written 50 years ago, demonstrating that there are internal struggles that are timeless, that have always been normal. Though this does seem to be the very reason why it took decades for the now 85-year-old author Judy Blume to say yes to a film adaptation of her book. All previous offers she had gotten were from folks in Hollywood who had visions that didn't align with hers, up until she spoke with Kelly Fremont Craig and producer James L. Brooks. So I can only presume that this movie is at least near 100% faithful to the book. Though I can't speak as to whether this problem existed in the book, but regardless, here's my biggest problem with the movie. It's very minimal in its resolution. There's more than one element that isn't wrapped up very well. One has to do with when Margaret finds out something about Nancy, the head of this girls' club, and it never really follows up on that, and I feel it should have done more to do so, given Nancy's tearful embarrassment when Margaret finds out, establishing her as a more sympathetic character than what we saw of her up until that point. Another thing is that Margaret's exploration in the religious field doesn't get a solid conclusion. Without detailing too much, we do get a final line, but it just left me with the insufficient feeling that her belief in God is indefinite, that it relies solely on whether or not anything good happens to her. On the other hand, for someone her age who is still only beginning her spiritual journey, it makes some sense that her understanding of faith doesn't go much deeper than that. Still, I would have liked for there to have been a hint that she was at least on a path to something deeper. Now, there are elements to this movie that could be good for sparking conversation between parents and their preteen or early teen kids, so if you're a parent with kids that age, this might be worth consideration. It is PG-13 for a reason, so just keep that in mind. As for how I feel overall, I definitely prefer The Edge of 17. I find it funnier and more rewatchable, but this is still a nice, good-hearted little film, even if it doesn't really know how to close out. And if you love the book, I'd say absolutely check it out. You'll probably love it just as much. Scoring on the Factor Facts, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. I will answer with a 62%. That's a wrap. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this review helpful. Like and share, subscribe for more. This is Pop Culture. I'm Alex Pop.